right, well, let's start with the second day of President Cyril Ramaphosa's testimony to the state capture inquiry. And I'm going to bring in my colleague Thulasizwe Simelane. Thulas, thank you so much for joining us again. It was very interesting what happened in the last hour when our colleague Siphamandla Goge doorstopped Jeff Radebe and asked specifically about the step-aside rule. You, of course, have explained that the 30-day grace period in which those charged with corruption in the ANC or other serious crimes have had to step aside, and tomorrow should be consequences. But it was interesting, he said the NEC is only going to be meeting on the 8th of May to discuss the matter.
Yeah, Sally, and that coming at the end of the day on which the ANC president has been testifying about the ANC's policies and procedures in as far as issues of corruption and state capture is concerned, and the political culture that allowed some of the rampant corruption that we've been seeing over the years. So quite aptly, on the same day that the grace period of 30 days that had been given by the National Executive Committee of the ANC coming to an end today for those charged with corruption and other serious crime to either step aside or face the possibility of being summarily suspended. And Siphamandla Goge, there in conversation with the ANC's head of policy, Jeff Radebe, who was part of the high-powered delegation of ANC leaders that came to support the ANC president. Jeff Radebe, they're saying that, well, now that the grace period has come and gone, the issue will then be discussed at length at the National Executive Committee of the ANC. That's on the 8th of May. That's coming within a week or so. And I suppose it will be at that point that they will be able to consolidate the lists that they had been calling for from the provinces of people who were in this particular position. A lot of focus falls on the ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule. But I tell you now, Sally, he is not alone in that particular boat of facing that situation of either being charged, of being charged either with corruption or other serious crimes and needing to either step aside or be suspended. It came at the end, of course, at the tail end of that conversation, Sally, that was examining the political culture in the ANC, where the ANC president, Cyril Ramaphosa, had been asked why the ANC seemed to be lethargic in responding to the growing calls and concerns of society about state capture, the influence of the Guptas within government processes over the years, concerns about political party funding and even processes in parliament. Take a listen to how he answered the question of why it is that, the ANC didn't seem to be meting out consequences by way of its disciplinary processes running parallel to any criminal prosecution that may be taking place against members, because in the words of Advocate Paul Pretorius, there's absolutely no bar at law to that happening, the parallel processes happening at the same time.
I know that in many organizations, including the private sector, that is the norm, that if you are charged, you immediately step aside, and some even do it voluntarily, because they fear that they will compromise the image and the integrity of the organization, so they step aside, and could also sometimes argue that, allow me space, I'll take a leave of absence to clear my name. And of course, it behoves on the organization itself whether they are going to prefer charges against that type of person. So for us, it has been a major step for the ANC to take, that when charged, you've got to step aside, and when serious allegations, you've got to go to the Integrity Commission and explain yourself. Now, this is a new way of dealing with issues that have to do with wrongdoing, and it needs space and time to be allowed. The ANC needs the space and time so that this new process, which will eventually emerge as a culture, should mature in the organization. I would argue that, suddenly changing it before it is tried and tested would lead to a lot of confusion.
And Thulas, there has been so much delay around getting this step-aside rule going properly. So many push and pull forces within the ANC about that issue alone in recent months. It's perhaps no wonder that it took the party so long to act on allegations of state capture, which, as we heard today, were coming in from as early as 2011. A Sunday Times report was mentioned, which was completely disregarded. Fikile Mbalula mentioned it. He flagged it in 2011. And the president saying it was only when the Gupta leaks came out did they realize that they simply couldn't avoid it any longer. But he also paid tribute to those who did blow the whistle, and also to journalists. You found that quite significant. Tell us why.
Yeah, absolutely, Sally. So, it seems to me that there was something of a charm offensive on the part of the ANC president here. Let's be honest about it. Part of it was... part was about him answering the questions about processes and the political culture in the ANC and in the various centers of power where the ANC is active, such as Parliament, the executive, fundraising issues, and the culture of responding to allegations of corruption. But a part of it was really about that charm offensive that says, yes, we acknowledge. You heard that a lot in the last 48 hours. Yes, we acknowledge we had systems. They didn't always work the way they were supposed to work, but we're turning over a new leaf. We will do better. That was the constant refrain. And in particular, I think you might want to look for the phrase, with hindsight. We heard a lot of that. With hindsight, we now realize there were delays. We could have been a bit more, responsive. But he did also, as part of that, I suppose, charm offensive, pay tribute quite extensively, Sally, quite extensively to journalists, the role of journalists twice, actually today, spending a couple of minutes talking about that. But also, I thought the issue around whistleblowers is significant, Sal, simply because I thought that his thinking on the adequacy or otherwise of our laws in protecting whistleblowers aligns with what I've heard the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo raise a number of times, to say that I've had many people who were whistleblowers come before me and say that after they blew the whistle on corruption, they found themselves ostracized, they were receiving death threats, and more importantly, they found themselves being unemployable. And it's the story of so many, the likes of Cynthia Stemple, Bianca Goodson, raising that particular issue, and many, many more whistleblowers. So that coincidence, take a listen to how the ANC president framed it, his thinking about whether or not the legislation is adequate to protect whistleblowers.
But I wish to conclude by paying tribute to all those South Africans who have played a role in unearthing corrupt activities that we now know as state capture. Here I make reference to those who've been whistleblowers. And whistleblowers have not had a great time in our country. Once they blow the whistle, they have been subjected to enormous pressures, and pressures that have affected them personally, professionally, career-wise, and also has affected their own households. They have been brave men and women of our country who, because of their abhorrence of corruption, blew whistles. And I regret that in many instances we have not treated them well. And we therefore need to have some process, legislation, of being able to protect whistleblowers.
Yeah, it is an important issue, because those are the people who had the courage to actually stand up when they knew it may well destroy their lives. Thulas, we've had 2 days of testimony. When he comes back in May, he'll be speaking as president of the country. If you look back at these last 2 days, what is your overarching feeling? Do you think that it was a really important moment of catharsis, acknowledgement, and a really important moment of reckoning for the ANC? Or was it just spin? I mean, there are two very different viewpoints out there. What is your sense from having watched all of it for the past 2 days?
I think both of them are true, Sally. Actually, I get the feeling that a large part of it was catharsis, in the word that the ANC president used to say this is a cathartic moment for the ANC. It's reflective. It was hardly ever going to be confrontational in that, you know, the ANC being a juristic entity, you're only scrutinizing the actions of the people, the individuals that constitute this juristic person called the African National Congress, and you can confront specific members and say, why did you do X, Y, and Z? To a certain extent, the evidence leaders tried to do that. Certainly, Advocate Alec Freund did at some point say, I put it to you, Mr. President, that actually you were slow in acting. You did not act even in the face of growing concerns and growing evidence and reports of corruption, to which, of course, the answer was, and here comes the what some will call the spin here, the answer was almost standard. With hindsight, I now realize that the delay was to the detriment of South Africans. With hindsight, you know, our thinking, for instance, around the issue, he said when he was asked about whether or not, when the DA was saying there should be a full-on parliamentary inquiry into state capture, and the pushback was to say the DA was being opportunistic at the time, the ANC pushing back and saying that. He says, you know, with hindsight, you realize that our thinking on these matters was informed by where we stood at the time politically. So there was a bit of that. There was a bit of the spin, and what I would say is the charm offensive that says, this is a new ANC. We've turned over a new leaf, but at the same time, the catharsis was there to say we are reflective. What can we do better? Where can we strengthen? And what more can we do? So a bit of both was present. It's just a matter of where people find emphasis, really.